The night he is supposed to feel invincible, the sky over Manhattan refuses to unclench, holding its rain back like breath. Inside the ballroom, 1,000 sparklers of glass and light bloom from chandeliers, and the city itself, ink black and studded with electric constellations, comes to lean on the windows as if listening to the hum of human joy, and Adrian Vale sits near the far pane, the carbon fiber armrest cool under his forearm, the rubber of his chair's tires whispering against polished stone each time he pivots to let another tide of laughter sweep past. It could be a coronation, the 10th anniversary of the merger that capped his rise, the quarter that shattered every record, the philanthropic pledge that turned the press on him like a school of bright fish. But in the music of cutlery and champagne and rising toasts he hears only serve, a push and pull that will not carry him, and he watches himself in the glass the way a person watches a stranger through rain, the bow tie straight because someone else straightened it, the jacket sitting with immaculate lines around muscles that no longer carry decisions, the face too calm. He corrects the drift of his chair with the small twitch of wrist that moves the joystick, a learned precision that is its own choreography, and his reflection obliges, curving back toward the carved crown molding and the screen's streaming praise, the celebrities talking about the year's miracle, the camera that swings close then slides away. As if politely embarrassed to happen upon him alone, a bell of sound peals from a corner. Congratulations, CEO, and then recedes, a wave against the pier, and in the wake the old ache rises, a ghost made of nerves that do not answer, and of the tunnel of aluminum and glass and a winter sun with its hard blade of light across a tarmac, and of the sensation of gravity becoming a verdict, and he wants not to leave, not to be anyone else, not even to be healed, though he once wished that in the small hours with his mouth cracked and his chest hot, but to be allowed to be quiet without disappointing the narrative everyone has borrowed him for. A hand touches the back of a nearby chair, moves it an inch, then another, as unobtrusively as the drift of a raft, and a voice says, gentle but not pitying, "Do you want this path clear?" And when he turns, the woman is in a plain black blazer and simple shoes with the shine scuffed from their toes. The silver tray she holds a field of mirrored moons, and the way she holds him in her eyes is not an appraisal and not hunger. God knows he knows both, has been measured and bitten and prayed to, and not fear, not that either, but recognition, the kind that leaps a gap without fanfare, and it startles him so that he forgets to put on the professional smile. She moves the chair anyway, the tray balanced, a motion practiced from moving cribs in cramped apartments, he thinks, and he says, "Thank you," and it is the same thank you he used to say to the airport staffer guiding him down a ramp when people were watching, grateful and transactional both. But then she looks toward the window and then back, and she says, "It's loud, do you want to be closer to the glass?" I get that. And there is the tiniest cough or laugh in her voice that makes him think she has been in rooms where her existence had to fight for its oxygen, a kind of dignity as automatic as breathing, and he hears himself answer, "I do," like a child, and he nudges the joystick and she moves the last chair, and the city comes closer, a vertical ocean swirling with taxis and headlights and the lights of other parties perched above other stories. A shriek of applause breaks as another investor takes the mic, reciting figures like a litany, and in the change of light his face in the glass looks younger, not because the lines are gone but because the expression of braced patience is gone, and he realizes that all week he has not been held in a gaze that did not evaluate or seek to impress, and is ashamed to notice how thirsty he was, like a man who has been sipping water all day and suddenly sees a lake. She shifts the tray to her other hand and says, "I'm supposed to pass the passion fruit tarts," a conspirator's whisper, and he says, "You can," and she smiles, making up her mind, as if she will do both the job and this kindness as long as it takes, and the music surges, and confetti gun flutters blow their metallic snow in arcs at the far end, and one curl of foil sails like a broken fish scale and sticks to his wheel, and for a second he sees it as a piece of the sea. How stupid, he thinks, and yet he cannot stop smiling at stupid. The investor, a man with a watch like a blister of gold, says, to the future, and the room becomes a storm of raised arms and glass, and the woman leans toward him so she can be heard without shouting, "My name's Evelyn, I go by Evie Ramos. My son calls me coach. He doesn't have a team, but he's decided we run plays," and he laughs, the first clean one of the night, because he can see it, a small hand slapping a table, designing strategy. "I wrote to your office," she says, and he feels the stone of bureaucracy drop in his stomach. His people, their gatekeeping, not always malicious, often just exhausted and sure of the shape of their days. "I wrote about the Foundation's assistive tech program. I wanted to say thank you, not ask for anything." The speech app. It's the first time my boy could say good morning fast enough to catch the morning, and her eyes get wet and then she grins as if scolding herself for that, and he remembers the features slide into place. The folded letters security passes him after events, the stack he keeps on his desk, the brown envelope he has not touched because it has a coffee stain. He wants to ask how old the boy is, whether he likes soccer, whether he is cruel to himself when he cannot keep up with his own ideas, but he hears in his head the board chair clearing his throat, the CFO's lean smile, the PR director's warnings about optics, and he sees the perimeters of his life like blueprints. He cannot step out of lines, though sometimes he thinks the lines are what is left of him, and he opens his mouth to tell her the mannerly thing, the safe thing, and instead he says, "Will you tell me his name?" and she exhales like she has been waiting on a bench that finally becomes street, and she says, "Mateo. He was in the hospital on the day of your accident, I think." I remember the ads changing. The news was everywhere, and I remember holding him while the monitors beeped and thinking, how do we carry strangers in our arms? And then a nurse told me you would live. And I was glad. Which later, when I saw you at that press conference, I thought, you don't need my glad, you have everything. But I kept it anyway, just so someone was. You know, and like that, the room folds around them, the way a sudden undertow folds around the ankles and makes even the most expert swimmer stumble, and he says, very softly, "I do," and she nods briskly, changing the subject for him, or protecting him, or just doing her job, and she offers him the tray and he picks nothing, and she says, "I'll leave one. If you don't like it, that can be our secret," and she sets a tart on the small tray attached to his chair, beside the folded card that says his name and the title people repeat like a talisman, and then she slips back into the surf with a motion that wastes no time, the dark line of her ponytail carved across the swirl of gowns and tuxedos, and he lifts the tart, wanting to taste something that is not an argument, and as he brings it to his mouth he sees under it, balanced on the tray where she put it slyly, a napkin with handwriting that leans like it is running, and he reads it, the looped letters saying, "If it's too loud tonight, don't mistake it for everyone you lead." Some of us just clap quietly when we're scared to be seen, and he sits still with that in his chest, a line he can hold like a railing as the floor tilts, and he yawns from the inside with the possibility that his life is not a stage after all but a room, with doors he can still open. The night does not end in epiphany, it ends in the floor manager's microphone cough and the contracted lights coming up in stages, in the efficient drift of brooms like shoals cleaning up after sharks, in the quiet of the elevator cage as it descends with a sigh and a shake, in the winter bright street air that smells like copper and old stories, his driver bringing the van with the ramp that lowers like a drawbridge, and in the rhythmic rasp of rain finally deciding to land, hesitating at first as if shy and then gathering itself all at once so that the windshield is a glass river. He rides home with the napkin under his palm, the card they forced him to wave pressed into the magazine pouch, and in his apartment, glass and steel and warmth and quiet machinery hum behind walls so that the heat does not make noise. He eats the tart in bed at 2 in the morning, the sweetness cutting through the glue of adrenaline, the taste of passion fruit a little foolish and entirely right, and when he wakes with the taste still faint in his mouth he has the courage to open the brown envelope on his desk, and there is a letter from Evie he recognizes by the long strokes. It is simple, a few paragraphs, but he reads the pauses too. He recognizes the choices, the refusal to be tragic, the refusal to apologize for asking for help because she just wanted to say thank you, and in the last line there is something that feels like the first time he put his hand on the yoke of a small plane, the sensation of trust moving through fingers, the opposite of control and yet the only thing that made control possible. If you ever want to stand in a place that is not a stage, come have coffee at the corner where I sit between Shift A and Shift B, there's nowhere to fall there except into a chair, and he types back with his eyes, his cursor a bead of thought on glass, and he does not tell anyone he has done it, not his assistant with her perfect armor of warmth, not his lawyer with his perfect armor of humor, not his chair of the board with the smile of a saint, and when he meets her in 3 days it is in a cafe with chipped mugs and a chalkboard drink menu that's half erased, the steam on the windows turning the city into a smear of watercolor, the low thump of bass from somewhere making the sugar packets shiver in their bowl. He arrives early because men like him don't arrive to places like this casually, they have to choreograph their entrances so they don't become the room, and he settles by the corner where the heater clicks and the plants bend toward the weak sun, and she arrives with her hair damp from mist and a giddy apology about buses and boots and a science project that involved a volcano that might still be volcanoing. We'll find out, she says, and right away the talk goes where he understands talk is supposed to go, to small things that open large ones, to how long coffee lasts in the arteries of a long day, to hamstrings that tighten when the rent is late, to the way people look away in elevators because they are afraid of making a mistake, to the ridiculousness of the phrase human capital, which when she says it he hears as humor cathedral, and he laughs, and she laughs, and then she grows serious and says, I know you get told every day what you are to other people. I can't imagine. I'm just a person who, when my boy presses the picture of pancakes and the app says pancakes in that voice that sounds a little like moss to me, because it's a little damp and quiet, I think, someone did this, and that someone had to tell 10 other someones and convince 20 more, and that sounds like you, so thank you, and at that he wants to cry, and not for the cheap reason of being seen, but because of the way she refuses to make his accident the hinge of either of their stories. She does not look at his chair with the expression of someone appraising the limits of a room, she just moves her own outside hers, and in that space he can show her his, and he hears himself say things he has not said even to the rooms with therapists and clocks, that he misses the weight of his own head on a pillow after a day of walking, not because walking was superior but because it had the invisible punctuation of fatigue, that sometimes he thinks the world wants a miracle from him. He is not interested in giving because he has learned that the miracle of a body is not its compliance, that he is ashamed of how easy it is to be cruel at scale, to sign a policy that moves money in the name of efficiency, that in the hallways of life is just a person wheeling faster than you can talk, trying to catch up. He tells her how the board is cutting the philanthropic arms budgets because the new vertical, the cloud ad tech that will turn everything into revenue, is the inevitable pivot. And how he wants to build the opposite of inevitable, he wants to build things that make rooms where people choose to stay, and she listens the way a coach listens to a player who cannot yet name the play he's seeing in his head, and she asks one question that unbuttons the whole suit: who do you talk to in your company who isn't paid to make you believe something? And he can name maybe 2, and both are leaving, and she nods and sips and then says, if you ever want to come to my place on a Saturday, I can promise you there's no board vote, but there will be a sink with dishes and a kid who thinks he should be allowed to put yogurt on pizza in the name of science, and he smiles until his cheeks hurt, and he says, "It sounds perfect," and in the weeks that follow she becomes not a secret by design but a secret by necessity, a wedge of ordinary that he preserves as if it would evaporate if he spoke it aloud in rooms with microphones. He goes twice to her apartment, the first time with his driver, the second with himself alone, learning the corners of her hallway and the way the elevator door sticks at the fourth floor a hair's breadth before it opens, and at her door Matteo answers with a device strapped like a watch, his eyes bright and his hair doing a thing with gravity that suggests a lifelong argument, and he says hello in a voice that has been synthesized from kindness and code, and under the mechanics there is the unmistakable signature of a boy. They play the easiest game, choose a sticker, then the hardest, listen to silence together, and Evie moves around them making it easy for them to be who they are without apology, and at one point he tells Matteo about flying and the boy's eyes go star-wide, and the next week he receives a drawing by mail of a plane that is also a house with wheels, with a door that is a heart, and in the corner a stick figure in a big chair with a smile that goes off his face, and he puts it by his screen at work, where he can see it when the CFO slides across a table. The day the real fight begins has the gray of a courtroom. There's the boardroom with its elliptic table and the windows that a generation of architects designed so executives could feel humble in the presence of sky, and it never works, and the men and women around him carry their power effortlessly, the way dancers carry their balance, and the CFO, Gerard, has his file of charts and his smooth voice that turns everything into weather, no one's fault, just systems doing what systems do. We'll sunset, he says, gesturing with one palm like summarizing a holy writ, we'll sunset the accessibility grant program and wrap it into the marketing budget, where, frankly, it belongs. We can highlight the stories we want and avoid the ones that aren't uplifting, and someone coughs and someone else nods and someone else meets Adrian's eyes and looks away and he feels his mouth go dry. He knows how they talk about him when he is not there, he knows the pity in present tense in a sentence, he knows the belief that there are parts of the company he no longer sees because his vantage point now is the height of his seat and not the stage. He does not want a grand argument, a speech that will be clipped and subtweeted. He wants a conversation in which he can lay down each stone and see if they build a path, but there is no time. Gerard has the votes. The bylaws were edited while he was in rehab learning to roll and transfer and get back up when he forgot he hadn't fallen, and the chair of the board whom he likes, a woman whose hands, covered in rings, remind him of coral reefs, is looking at him with the gentlest steel. Adrian, she says, our mission remains the same, this is just how it looks in practice, and he hears inevitable, he hears weather, and he says, no, and then louder, no. We built this on the backs of people who cannot get into our buildings because the doorways are still not wide enough. We are not going to hang their stories like holiday lights, and Gerard murmurs, I understand your passion, as if speaking to a child, and it is then, with the air thick and sweet with a cologne he cannot place, that he feels something in him, some cable that has held, begin to sing. He thinks of Evie's question, who do you talk to who isn't paid to make you believe something, and all at once the strangest image occurs to him, not the plane falling, not the chair as a ship, but Matteo's picture of a house plane with wheels, a door shaped like a heart, and he understands the shape of what he wants to build, not a product but an ethic, a place that is many places, a company that treats its people as the first market and the world as a client, every doorway sized for the future of a child's laughing body. He leans forward, not because it is dramatic but because it is easier to speak this way, and he says, we will not sunset anything. In fact, we will widen double the budget of the foundation, and we will remove the permission needed to apply for assistive tech grants. We will reverse the policy that requires an employee sponsor. We will publish the code for the speech app, open source everything, and there is a silence that feels like a room remembering it has windows, and then Gerard smiles like a dagger, with what authority, and Adrian's lawyer's voice comes from somewhere, reminding him of a clause he insisted on when the merger made him above needing protections, as they put it, with the authority of the Class B shares you thought I didn't look at, he says, calm, because that calm is all of him, because he cannot stand and he cannot pound a table, and so he has learned to weigh words until they must fall, and Gerard's smile goes heavy and graceless as a wet cloth, and the chairwoman says, we should discuss this in executive session, and he says, we can, and we will, and at noon I will also discuss it with the world, and that is the moment he becomes a version of himself that could be believed even by the version who lay in a hospital bed with machines drawing terrariums of breath around him. They argue, and there is law, and there is the rhythm of threat, but there is also the honey of compromise, and he refuses to taste, and when he rolls out it is with the old hum he remembers on tarmacs, the engine of a thing that will leave the ground if handled with respect, and he does the one thing that has saved him in boardrooms and cockpits and the moments in between, he asks for help that is not permission, he texts Evie, press conference at noon. If you can't watch, don't. If you can, maybe bring a sticker, and she sends back a photo of Mateo's hand holding a star, and 1 hour later he wheels onto a small stage in the atrium his architects designed for light and streaming cameras, and the sight of his employees from facilities and engineering and design all clustered there like an audience that has agreed to show up for a story that might ask something of them is a kind of mercy that makes his mouth lock for a second before he lifts the mic. He does not say the lines PR wrote for him, he does not apologize for the inconvenience of truth, he does not use the words hero or inspire, because those words have been laid down as mines at the feet of people like him, and he refuses to step there. He says, instead, I have been carried by rooms. Before my accident, I believed invincibility was a skill. Now I believe rooms that hold each other are the only spaces where anyone survives. So our company is going to become a company that makes rooms, and people look at one another, unsure if this is metaphor, and he makes it not. We will open our patents. We will build accessibility toolkits for our competitors. We will measure our profit in lives that don't have to be argued for. And we will do this while remaining excellent at the other things that have made us rich. Because we are not, and he almost says only our worst day, the line he has rehearsed in feelings not words, but he catches himself dodging pain, and he says it, formal as scripture, we are not only what we can do unassisted, and in a far corner, out of sight from almost everyone but him, near the planted ficus they rotate quarterly so it grows straight, he sees Evie with Mateo on her hip, and the boy lifts a paper star, a small thing cut with blunt scissors from yellow, and he holds it high and then taps the star against his own forehead, and the voice on his wrist says, go, like a rocket, and the room laughs, but it breaks something too, it breaks the game of politeness they were all willing to play, and in that crack the real light drops. The questions that follow are not friendly, not all of them. They talk of fiduciary duty and market headwinds and the risk of making code free in a world that eats free people, but he is anchored, not in stubbornness but in the knowledge of his own ordinary. He is not promising to end capitalism or to become a church, he is promising direction, a compass. He is promising that their company will be held to what it claims when it puts slogans on buses, and when Gerard steps forward at last, rolling his eyes just enough that the cameras catch it, to insist that this is irresponsible, and to brandish a clause like a cudgel, the lawyer's voice again is in his head pointing to language that was once an afterthought and now is everything. I hear your concern, Adrian says, and will take the vote, and then regardless of the vote I will exercise the discretionary budgetary authority the bylaws confer, and I will fund the foundation myself if the board refuses to allocate. I sell a plane, I sell a floor of this building, I sell the chair I'm sitting in if I have to, and the laughter is real for once, as he intended, because sometimes it is the promise to burn the furniture that makes the people in the house decide to replace the windows, not the wall, and when the vote is taken sweaty and close they do not lose, or win, they deadlock, which in their bylaws means his vote breaks the tie, and he votes to become, and there is a sound like a sandbag dropping, a shift of weight, and he once flew through turbulence so violent he thought the sky had become a stone, and this feels like that and not like that, because beyond it he can see the horizon returning. After the press conference he goes upstairs with his practice of staying still until the people who want to congratulate him have found words and the people who want to arrange his shame have found a room, and he is exhausted, not the theatrical despair of a man at the end of an opera, just tired the way a body gets tired when it has been asked to carry everything a mouth has said, and he wants to lie on a couch he cannot easily transfer to without help, a couch that mocks him with its perfect uselessness, and then there is a knock, and Evie is in his doorway with 2 coffees that might as well be medals, and she says, "Coach," and he starts to say, "You shouldn't be back here," and then he thinks of all the doors that have told her that, and he says, "Yes," and they sit by the window that makes the river a snake of light, and he tells her about the part where he almost said the line about worst days, and she tells him about the part where she almost cried when he said rooms, and Matteo rolls across the carpet on his stomach with the hard joy of children and snakes, and taps his star gently against the glass as if to see if anything beyond cares, and he asks if he can hold it and the boy says yes and hands it like a diploma, and he presses it to his own forehead because that game has rules, and he sees in the reflection not the CEO everyone makes him, and not the patient she refuses to make him, but a man holding paper light, and he laughs at the way everything had to be heavy for so long for this to be possible. In the weeks after, the company becomes a machine that creaks and then moves. Engineers volunteer weekends to document internal tools and push them to a public GitHub, lawyers grimace and then find ways to write risk language that frames generosity as the most conservative option. Designers build toolkits that imagine hands and eyes and ears of 1,000 kinds. Facilities measure doors not by Americans with Disabilities Act minimums but by bodies they know. HR removes the requirement that those seeking help do so through a manager. The foundation's budget numbers double and then triple and then break their own spreadsheet, and with each change the equal and opposite force rises. The markets do what markets do, shouting when a thing deviates. The pundits write the word stunt, and inside his company people brook no change because no one wants to admit they like their chairs exactly where they are. He makes mistakes, he knows it, he misses meetings where someone needed him because he is in an elementary school cafeteria at a long table with kids who are not listening to him because the pizza is literally right there. He signs an open letter that lumps everyone who disagrees with him into a bucket they don't belong in. He snaps at a young analyst who points out that open source might not mean what he thinks it means, and he apologizes publicly, and he learns the humility of being new at a thing he has tied his name to, and he fails out loud and does not die. A journalist writes a profile describing him as haunted, and he reads it and feels old for a second. Then he looks at the drawing on his desk and feels like a beginner, and he chooses beginner. The climax arrives not as a single storm but as a weather pattern that refuses to leave. At a gala 6 months later, smaller, meant to honor engineers and nurses and the night crews who made impossible things happen for months, they serve food from carts rather than sky-high towers, and children run between chairs, not as props, but because Evie, now employed as a community liaison with a title she finds silly and a power she uses comfortably, insisted that if they were a company that made rooms, they should be the kind where a child's spill is not a scandal but a stain with a story, and then the reporters arrive with a lawsuit rumor like a stain of oil in water, and Gerard, who has resigned with a package that turns his moral outrage to equity, has gone to a competitor and given interviews that sound like priestly lamentations about fiduciary betrayal, and into this delicate party walks the Attorney General's lead counsel with a polite face and a subpoena carriage, and for a second he feels the old narrative grab his ankle. You tried something beautiful and the world punished you because the world is garbage, and that is the story. And then a small hand taps the back of his chair, a new game he and Matteo have, and a voice that is sometimes moss, sometimes bells, says, "Stay," a word the boy has learned not as command, or as obedience, but as an idea of place, and he breathes in, 3, out, 4, the breath of the rehab gym, and he says to the council, "We will, of course, cooperate," and the grief of a good night derailed breaks across faces, and Evie leans to him and says, "Coach," and he says, "Game plan, we keep the party," and the music shifts, softens, becomes something like a lantern, and he gives the council a plate of dumplings, and a man with a badge eats one and laughs, and the world does not end. In the weeks of depositions and stories that make him a symbol of a thing he is not, he is tempted to retreat into his penthouse, to shrink his life to the size of rooms he can control, but Evie refuses him that smallness. She texts him pictures of soccer practice with kids who invented a rule where every point is scored by someone who hasn't scored. She brings him grocery lists that send him and his assistant to bodegas where no one cares who he is and the light on the fruit looks like theater but is just a bulb. She drags him to a school concert where a boy with hearing aids plays triangle offbeat and the parents all clap on the beat he hears. And he sees in all this the motion he wants in his company and in himself, the rhythm of a tide that returns. When the Attorney General ends up not filing, announcing instead a partnership to build standards for data ethics because they found he had indeed not done the thing that was whispered, critics call it a victory, and he refuses that word too, because it makes the body reach for a sword it does not need. The real fight had not been the case, it was whether he would make his own interior a smaller place to survive it. He sits at his desk that night looking at the city like a wild animal outside glass, and he thinks of that first party, the sea of celebration, the way it buffeted and pushed and asked him to be a kind of chosen thing he did not want, and he thinks of this party, the one that will happen next week to celebrate not a win and not a quarter but the naming of the new lab they will open downtown, rooms with doors tall enough for his chair and low enough for a child's eyes. The name will be ordinary, he decides, not his maybe the room, he writes, and then scratches it, and writes Matteo's door and then scratches that too. The boy will hate it and in the end he will call it the open, and it will be a place where the very architecture is designed to take away the feeling of having to ask permission for existing. The rain begins again, tapping the glass with the persistence of small hands, and in the kitchen of a woman whose boots are by the door and whose fridge is half magnets, a boy tapes a paper star to a wall with a face drawn on it, and he thinks of that. 2. He cannot sleep because the scale of what remains to be done is not a sadness but a metric of hope, and at 3 in the morning he texts Evie, "Are you awake?" And she sends a photo of a child and a cat like a comma that fell asleep mid-sentence, and says, "No, we are not," and he apologizes with a selfie of his ridiculous tart-eating grin from months ago, which she has somehow saved, and she sends back, "Sleep. The morning will clap when it means it," and he sets his phone down on the napkin she wrote and he laughs in the dark. Months later, the world, which is generous and cruel both without rhythm, gives him the scene he did not know he needed to understand his own story, not a mass of cameras but a kitchen, not a stage but a rug, not a storm but a ceiling fan doing its best. They celebrate Matteo's 7th birthday with cupcakes that are not good enough and therefore perfect, candles that gutter and then catch, frosting that makes teeth farmyard blue. There are 5 kids from their building, 2 of whom roar. everywhere they go because we are dragons today, and one of whom is brand new to glasses and holds them on his nose with terror and pride, and there are two women from Evie's work who have that bustle of people who have trained their lives to carry extra chairs, and there is his driver, who pretends not to be moved, and slowly surrenders, and there is Adrian, a paper cone hat on his head that will leave a dent, his chair set low so he is face level with messy faces, and the song is sung and he helps blow, carefully, doing the thing where he angles air around the flame without the humiliation of needing to be the one to finish it. He has learned so much, and after the cake and the presents that are mostly practical, one of the dragons brings him a glitter glue bottle and a construction paper star and a hand that expects him to be able to do this, and he does. He makes a star that looks like all of them, trying and messy, and Evie's eyes are warm and tired and present. And she says across the table, quietly so only he hears, because she has learned to make space as naturally as she breathes, "When I saw you that night by the window, you looked like a man drowning while everyone applauded the ocean. I wanted to say, swim this way, but I didn't know if I had the right," and he says, "You did. You do. I don't know if I would have swum anywhere," and she shakes her head, fierce with disagreement in the way only friends are. "No, coach. You were swimming. You just needed someone to wave," and he thinks of all the hands that have waved him toward himself, of nurses with voices that could crack stone, of engineers with coffee breath and brilliance, of lawyers with their heavy books and soft eyes, of kids with star-sticky fingers, and he feels the old ache, the ghost of gravity, not as a wound but as a tendon connecting him to his life. It is not over, it will not be over. The lawsuits, the market, the way people will talk about him like a carved thing. But it is not only that, and it is not the only story in the room. Later, when the last child is retrieved and the apartment looks like a storm made of paper tore through it and then went for a nap, he wheels to the window, the same motion, always, the glass like a god that does not judge, and he looks at the city with less bitterness, with more hunger, with the desire of someone who has finally found a way to be with other people without demanding that they stand in a circle and clap around a word he did not choose. He turns, and the room is quiet, and Evie is stacking plates with the competence of an army and the softness of an unarmed heart, and he says, afraid to say it as if speaking will make it corny and untrue, "I don't know what to call this," and she looks up and shrugs and says, the way a person puts their hand on a door and opens it, "Tuesday," and he smiles so hard he thinks the lines on his face have found a map, and he moves his chair toward the counter to help, and she allows it, miracle that it still is, every time, not permission but partnership, not inspiration but the honest mechanics of caring for a life. The circle closes and opens again with the smallest click, the one a house makes when it breathes, and across the city, in his employees' kitchens, in boardrooms and buses, in apartments where people count and count again, the same click, a room made more by the people in it, and so, alone is now a place he visits for rest and not exile. Celebration is now what he builds when he can, hope is the thing he never owned and now refuses to profit from, and a single mother reaches out again and again, not to save him but to connect, and his hand, in whatever sense hands can still be hands, reaches back.